families of origin, that just is a phrase that makes me smile. Well, maybe I should explain. We think that our family of origin on both sides is sometimes, not that we make fun of them, but they're worth smiling over. The history and not only that, the family of origin stories in the Old Testament are worth smiling over. The stories of Abraham and Sarah, and the story of Jacob and Esau and their rivalry. The story, going back, I guess, a generation of Isaac and Rebekah, and just the nonsense that Isaac went through to be able to actually take his wife and go and make the rest of their life. The story of the children of Jacob and Joseph, who is the favorite, and like Cain and Abel, generations before, in the earlier part of the book of Genesis, much story of the struggle between siblings and their rivalry. So you can smile over those things. We do tend to gloss over that part of the story, but it is good to look at that from the standpoint of looking at how God's people, how in God and in the journey with God, those weaknesses and those very human aspects of our families of origin come into play. And they don't deprive us human beings of being used by God as instruments to bring forth His vision, His kingdom, His realm, His way, His will, His purpose. If you think you don't have family issues, well, just think for a moment about being with your in-laws and their gatherings, and maybe some of the conversation like Beth and I would have on our way home as I'm asking questions. Why is person X so verbal, and then these people you don't hear about? Or she often will say about my family when we are visiting a large gathering, you just never know what's going to happen next. You may ask for a plan for the day, but far be it from that plan to hold anybody, in check. Things just spring into action in my family. My father, pretty critical. Seems that that's a role that he plays because his father felt that that was a role he should play. So learning these codes and learning some of these things that somehow they get deep in us, and sometimes they're not identified or reflected on too much. I was in conversation with my sisters about our uncles and our aunt, and always the story through decades and decades was the hero stories of the uncles. But upon reflection today, we kind of think our Aunt Patty is the real hero. Someone said, Jesus might be in your heart, but Grandpa is in your bones. Maybe that's a funny way to say that, just reflecting on some of those stories of our lives as they go back some generations is really a helpful part of emotional growth and maturity, and then to use that with Jesus in prayer and in fellowship with small groups of our closest friends to grow. There's a Hasidic story that says, I have to begin with myself. At first, I thought I could change the world. But then I realized I can't. And then I thought I could change the region around in which I live, but then I came up short. Then I thought I could change maybe just the immediate community within which I live. But My abilities did not meet that challenge. And then I thought, maybe I can change my family. But even then, finally, I realized I have to begin by changing myself. My version, or a version I've thought about, as people have asked me about some controversial issues that kind of seem to have some ways of plumbing into emotions in us, and even going back some generations. Take the issue of homosexuality or LGBTQ, the United Methodist Church, and whether potentially we might divide over these things. At first, I thought I had useful insights, contribution, and that I figured some things out on that score. And then the issue of race came up, and racism. I thought I had useful insights, a contribution. I thought I'd figure some things out on that score. And then the issue of American politics came up, Trump, presidential election. I thought I had some useful insights, a contribution, that I'd figured some things out on that score. And then I realized that I have to begin by changing myself. I realized that we have to begin with our own beloved community. Another thing is about how we present ourselves. What's the posture, or what's the sort of self-understanding that we represent to the community around us and even the closest circles of our friends? And that is that there's some weaknesses and some wounds, like Paul learns about or expresses in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. In that place in his letter, he talks about that thorn which would not go away. I won't take time to read it, but you look that up. 2 Corinthians 12, 2 through 10. Do you remember? He was saying, I have prayed and I have asked God to remove this thorn from my flesh. And we've talked for centuries about what that thorn was. But he chose instead to say that God said to him, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. So that's the second point, is just having this posture of being a community of wounded healers. Not that we relish or glorify our brokenness, but that we understand that those things are not so buried so deep like the iceberg that nobody can see any of that or imagine that that's the case. And the last thing is just the importance of boundaries. And again, Scripture. Look at Mark chapters 1 and 2. Just read through those chapters and see how Jesus comes into the midst of human interaction, communities, and then departs. The people expect Jesus to be X. And Jesus says, no, I must go to this next village. Or consider in chapter 2 how 4 friends brought a sick paralytic to Jesus on a mat, couldn't get access, so they broke through the ceiling, lowered him down into the midst of Jesus. What a great image of a small group, of life in the church, bringing people to Jesus. Well, I can see time running out, but those are good scriptures to reflect on. Look also at Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me, you know me. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. Where can I go to be away from your spirit? Or where can I flee your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. Even the darkness is not dark to you. Isn't that amazing and wonderful? Even the darkest feelings that we might have, is not too dark for our Maker. For it was you who formed me, my inward parts, knitting me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made by you, my God.